The woman from the bank asked if I was calling on behalf of the deceased account holder, and I told her I was the account holder, and for 3 full seconds she said nothing at all. "Sir, I need to ask you something directly," she finally said. "Our fraud department flagged your account this morning after receiving a death notification through a third-party verification service. Are you currently deceased? I have been asked strange things in 64 years of living. I have never been asked that one, and I found myself looking down at my own hand on the kitchen counter, as if I needed to check that. I told her I was alive, standing in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold while we talked. She apologized, mentioned date entry errors, mismatched Social Security records, a distant cousin sharing my name, and said she'd lift the hold on my card. I thanked her and hung up and told myself that was the end of a strange morning, that IT was not the end of IT, and my phone buzzed 40 minutes later with a text from Dottie Pruitt, a woman I've known since her husband and I served together on the church maintenance committee. No words, just a screenshot. I opened it standing at my own counter, still in my robe, and my own face looked back at me. A photo from Ellie's engagement dinner, me laughing at something out of frame, a paper plate of ribs in my hand. Beneath it, in a gentle serif font, Walter Ray Dansen, 64, of Millbrook, passed peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. I read it twice before my hands caught up to what my eyes already understood. IT named my late wife Carol correctly, down to the exact years we were married. It named the hardware store I ran for 31 years before I sold it. And it said I loved fishing at Cobb's Landing every June, a detail I've never once told anyone outside my own house, not Dottie, not my oldest friend from the store. No, AT the bottom, under a small photo of white lilies. In lieu of flowers, the family kindly requests donations toward final expenses. A donation button. A goal of $8,000. $6,200 already raised. Someone was collecting money for a funeral I hadn't had. I scrolled down the comments before I could stop myself. The way you can't help touching a burn to see if it's really as bad as it feels. 40-some messages, most of them kind, most of them from people I barely remembered. One stopped me. "Rest easy, Walter. Cobb's Landing won't be the same without you out there every June." Someone had already turned my private habit into a public eulogy line, and strangers were quoting it back to each other like scripture. I called Dottie back, my thumb less steady than I expected from a man who ran a hardware register through 3 tornado seasons without flinching. She picked up crying. "Walter, thank God. Frank saw it an hour ago. People are already commenting." I didn't know what to think. She didn't know who had posted it, only that it came from a page called Millbrook Remembers, shared forward from somewhere else, and that Pastor Ruiz had already mentioned my name in the Wednesday announcements, before anyone thought to simply pick up a phone and check. I stood in my own kitchen, holding proof of my own death in one hand, and the question that mattered wasn't who had written IT. IT was how in the world they knew about Cobb's Landing. I didn't call the funeral home listed at the bottom of the notice, a place 2 counties over I'd never used. Something told me to understand the shape of the lie before I went knocking on its door. Whoever wrote this hadn't guessed at my life. They had lived close enough to borrow pieces of it, the way you borrow a tool from a neighbor's shed and put it back before anyone noticed it was missing. Frank Alvarez came across the yard before I'd even finished my coffee. No jacket, hat in his hands like he was arriving at a viewing rather than a Tuesday morning. "Walter, whatever's going on with your kids, that's your business," he said. "But I told Marlene at the diner it had to be a mistake, on account of I watched you mow your own lawn yesterday. She didn't believe me, said the post looked too official to be fake. I asked him how far it had already traveled. Past the point where quiets can catch up to it, he said. The alumni page shared it. Somebody from your old church board shared it too. Behind him, his wife Marlene called from their porch, wanted to know if it was really me standing there, alive. And when Frank shouted back that it was, she came down the steps in her housecoat just to look at me, the way you'd look a photograph to confirm it hadn't been altered. She didn't say much. She just squeezed my arm and went back inside, and I understood then that I wasn't only fighting a lie anymore. I was fighting the relief people felt at being wrong about it, which is a stranger thing to sit across from in grief. He went home, and I sat with that a minute, understanding something I hadn't let myself think through yet. A lie doesn't move at the speed you correct it. It moves at the speed people are willing to grieve. And grief, even secondhand grief for a man they barely know, moves fast. I call my son first, because a man's first instinct in trouble is still his children, even at 64, even 3 years a widower. Marcus picked up on the fourth ring. His voice pitched with that particular brightness people use when they're bracing for a conversation they already know is coming. Dad, hey, everything okay? I asked if he'd seen the obituary. The pause that followed was a half-second too long for an innocent man. Yeah, I heard something got posted. Crazy, right? Probably some scam using your name. Identity stuff happens all the time now. I'll look into it. I asked him how a scammer would know I like fishing at Cobb's Landing every June. Another pause, shorter, but there. I don't know, Dad. Maybe you mentioned it online somewhere. People find weird things. I have never posted about Cobb's Landing anywhere in my life. I let that sit between us the way you let a fish feel the hook before you said it, and told him I was going to call his sister next. You really don't need to make this bigger than it is, he said. Quick now. It's embarrassing enough. If you start calling everybody and asking questions, it just looks like family drama. Can we handle it quietly and get it taken down? I asked what exactly there was to be quiet about, seeing as I was the one who'd been declared dead, not the one doing the declaring. He said he had a client call and would phone the obituary site himself. I thanked him and meant it, though some part of me already understood. He wasn't calling anybody except someone closer to home. My daughter Ellie called before I reached her. She'd heard it through a cousin, through a co-worker, through the alumni group. Her voice cracked in a way that told me she believed at least part of what she'd been fed. Dad, is it true you've been sick? Marcus said something a few weeks back about your heart, that you didn't want to worry us. Is that what this is? I told her my heart was fine, that I'd had a physical in March and been cleared for another year of arguing with my grandkids about screen time. I asked exactly what Marcus had told her. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard the outline of a story I'd never been told. He said you'd had some tests done and didn't want a fuss made. Said if it came up, we should just let you handle it your own way. There were no tests. Somebody had built a story weeks in advance, in case anyone came asking, and handed pieces of it to my daughter long before a stranger's obituary showed up wearing my face. I opened my laptop that afternoon and found the fundraiser link Dottie had sent. Still live. The counter had climbed since morning $7,100. 91 people had opened their wallets to bury a man who was sitting at his own kitchen table, reading their names one at a time. Near the bottom of the donor list, one name stopped me cold. My cousin Diane, my late brother's daughter, $300 with a note for the family during this impossible time. Uncle Walter always looked out for us. Diane had called twice this past year needing help with rent, and both times I'd sent what I could without making her ask twice. She had grieved me faster than she called to check on me in months, and that discovery hurt in a way the obituary itself hadn't quite managed yet. Dean, Ellie's fiancé, called that evening too, careful and apologetic, saying he'd already shared the fundraiser with his own side of the family before anyone told him to wait. I feel sick about it, he said. My mother sent money. Walter, she's never even met you in person. I told him it wasn't his fault, and I meant that he'd been handed a story dressed up to look true, the same as half the town, and there's a particular kind of guilt that belongs only to the people who built the lie, not the ones who simply believe their own family. I printed the obituary, which felt strange, printing proof of my own death, but I wanted it in my hands, not floating on a screen where it could vanish without a trace. I sat with it at the table where Carol and I used to do the Sunday crossword, reading it the way I used to read a bad shipment invoice at the store, hunting for the one figure that didn't belong. The photograph came first, cropped tight around my face, but I recognized a maroon tablecloth behind me. Ellie's engagement dinner. For people had phones out that night at that angle. Ellie, her fiancé, Dean, Marcus, and Marcus's wife, Renee. The wording came next. Passed peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. Template language, easily copied. But the line about Carol, her full name and our wedding date down to the day, matched exactly what sat in a folder on my computer labeled Insurance Estate. A folder I had shared with Marcus exactly once, over Christmas, when I walked him through refined things just in case, the kind of quietly practical thing a father does for his son, never once imagining it might be used against him. I called the obituary platform support line. After 20 minutes on hold, a young man named Corey picked up. Careful with his words the way people are when they've been trained not to say anything that could land them in a deposition. The listing came through our standard family submission form. He said, "I can't share the account email with you directly, sir, even though the deceased happens to be you sitting right there on the phone with me." I asked, half joking, how I was supposed to prove I was alive over a telephone line. "Honestly," he said, "arguing with me about it is a pretty strong start." Then he told me the one thing that mattered more than the joke. The submission had come from an email address close to my son's name, with 2 digits swapped, the kind of address someone builds fast and never expects to be traced. He also confirmed the account had uploaded a scanned family authorization document to unlock the donation feature, something the platform doesn't require, but does allow for verified next of kin. Somebody had gone to the trouble of forging authorization. That wasn't panic. That was planning, done in advance, by someone who expected to need it. I called Frank back and asked about the alumni page. He put me in touch with a woman who ran it, a retired teacher named Sandra, who pulled up the original share while I waited on hold. "It came from an account called M. Dansen Family Updates," she said. "Brand new. Made maybe 2 days before the post went up. One photo, a sunset, nothing before or after. I approved it because the name matched yours, and I figured it was a relative handling something official. I'm sorry, Walter. I should have asked more questions." A page built for one purpose, days ahead of time, under a name close enough to mine to pass without scrutiny. Whoever built it hadn't improvised that morning. They had been waiting for a reason to use it. Sandra mentioned one more thing before we hung up, almost as an afterthought. The account that posted it followed my page for exactly 2 days before it ever shared anything, she said. Then it never posted again. Whoever runs it built it just to do this one thing. A tool made for a single job and never touched again. Not the behavior of a stranger running a scam, but of someone local, patient, and specific about what they wanted to accomplish. That I was still holding the phone when the bank called again. A different woman this time. Flatter, more official. "Mr. Dansen, this is Priya, First Heritage Fraud Prevention. Yesterday afternoon, before we received the death notification, there was an attempt to add an authorized user to your checking account online. It was declined. The security questions didn't match. Given today's flag as well, we need you to come into a branch with identification." I asked what time the attempt happened. 2:14 p.m. yesterday. She said, "AT 2:14 yesterday afternoon. I had been standing in my own driveway, on the phone with Marcus, listening to him tell me he couldn't make Sunday dinner because he was buried in paperwork for a new job bid. I drove to the branch the next morning and sat across from a woman named Ms. Patterson, whose calm, unhurried manner told me she'd walked 100 frightened people through worse mornings than mine. She turned the screen so I could see the activity too, which I appreciated, since most people in her chair keep it angled only for themselves. "The authorized user request came from an IP tied to a device that's logged into your account before," she said, "which usually means either you did it or someone with your login information did." I told her I'd never given anyone my online banking access. "Do you share your login for anything small? Paying a bill for you, checking a balance?" I thought back to Christmas, to that folder, to a conversation where Marcus had asked to double-check my direct deposit was routing correctly after I switched pharmacies, and I'd read the account number off my statement without a second thought while he typed it into his phone.ms. Patterson didn't say anything judgmental. She just nodded, the way people nod when they've heard the same story with different names attached to it. "There's a pattern we call anticipatory access," she said. Someone tries to gain account control ahead of an expected life event, real or fabricated. If the account holder were confirmed deceased, that authorized user request would have looked routine to a less careful reviewer. It would have gone through. I asked what that would have meant, practically, if it had gone through before I ever caught wind of the obituary. It would have meant someone else had access to move funds, redirect statements, potentially open lines against your accounts, before probate, before any court oversight, before you even knew to object, she said. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that's the shape of what was attempted. The shape of what was attempted. I drove home with that phrase sitting on my chest like a stone I hadn't asked to carry. That evening I drove to Marcus and Renee's without calling first and sat in their driveway a full minute before going in, because I already understood whatever came next was going to cost me something. Renee opened the door, and her face did something I had seen exactly once before, the summer she wrecked her father's boat and had to walk in and tell him. Half a second of pure fear before the practiced calm slid over it like a sheet pulled across furniture. "Walter, we were just about to call you," she said, a beat too fast. Marcus came out wiping his hands on a dish towel, and when he saw my face, whatever he'd rehearsed left him for a moment. "Dad, look, I know how this looks." I told him I hadn't said a word yet, so I wasn't sure how he already knew. He sat down heavy on the arm of the couch, and for the first time since the obituary appeared, he stopped performing for me. "I owe the bank on the business loan," he said. "The second crude truck. It went bad faster than I told anyone. 3 months behind. They sent a letter about calling the guarantee. Dad, your name's on that loan. You co-signed in 22 so I could get better terms." I remembered him promising it was a formality, that his credit would carry it within a year, that he'd never actually need me to stand behind it. I remembered something smaller too, Marcus asking me last spring, almost in passing, whether I consider adding him to my accounts for convenience, in case something happened suddenly and he needed to handle things fast. I'd told him there was no rush, that I had a will in a folder and Nathan's number written on the inside cover. He'd said, "Sure, no rush," and let it drop, sitting in his living room now. I understood it had never actually been dropped at all. "I panicked," he said. "I read somewhere that if there's a death in the family, some creditors pause collection while an estate settles. I wasn't trying to steal from you. I swear. I was buying time. A few weeks, long enough to refinance before they called a guarantee and wrecked both our credit." I asked whose idea the fundraiser was. Since pausing a collections call doesn't require a donation button, he looked at Renee. Renee looked at the floor. "That part got away from me," he said. Renee's cousin runs a memorial page that shares things automatically. It spread faster than I expected. And once people started giving, I figured, we're already this deep, it might as well cover what I owe, and nobody would ever have to know how bad it got. Not an accident, not a scammer. A fire he'd lit on purpose, then let burn wider once he saw what to pay for. "Say something, Dad," Marcus said when I didn't answer right away. "Please, yell at me if you need to. This silence is worse." I told him I wasn't going to yell, not because I wasn't angry, but because yelling would let him spend the rest of the evening managing my anger instead of answering my questions, and I intended to keep asking questions for as long as it took. "What do you need from me right now?" he asked, and I could hear, underneath it, a man hoping the answer would be small. I told him I needed to go home and think, which was true, though it wasn't the whole truth. I also needed distance from that living room before I said something I couldn't walk back, because underneath the calm I was working hard to keep. Some part of me wanted to ask him whether he'd have let the lie run all the way to my funeral if nobody had ever called to check. I asked Marcus the only question that actually mattered to me in that living room. Did he understand that people believed I was dead? Not inconvenienced. Not confused. Dead? He said of course he understood, that he was sorry, genuinely sorry, but that it spiraled and he hadn't known how to unwind it without everyone learning exactly how bad his finances had gotten. And didn't I know what that would do to his marriage, his standing at his kids' school, at church, everywhere. Can we please just handle this privately? Renee said, finding her voice. If you go to the bank and file some big report or call the obituary company demanding names, it becomes a whole thing. Everybody in Millbrook finds out Marcus nearly lost business and that you co-sign a loan for a company that failed. Is that really the story you want people telling? I told her the story currently circulating was that I was dead, which struck me as considerably worse than a story about a father helping his son. Nobody meant to actually hurt you, Marcus said. Nothing really happened. The obituary is basically down already. I called this afternoon. The money can be refunded. No real harm was done, Dad. Can we move past this before it turns into something none of us can walk back? No real harm was done. I thought of Diane's $300, sent by a woman who couldn't always cover her own rent, given to comfort a family she believed was burying its father. I thought of 91 people who'd reached into pockets that weren't deep to begin with. Small towns don't donate from abundance. They donate from obligation and memory and love. And someone in this room had decided that was a resource worth spending. I asked Marcus, plainly, whether the account access attempt at 214 had been him. That he didn't answer right away. Renee's hand found his arm, not comfortingly, but the way you steady someone before they say something they can't take back. I was trying to see if the direct deposit could be temporarily rerouted, he said finally, just until the loan situation settled. I was going to put it back. Every dollar, once the refinance came through. A man doesn't often get to hear out loud from his own son's mouth that he planned to quietly redirect his father's income and undo it before anyone noticed. As though a thing only counts as theft if nobody catches it in time, I told him I needed to go home and think. Marcus said something that told me exactly how this family had learned to survive its own dishonesty. Please don't make a scene about this at Sunday dinner, he said. Everybody's going to be there. Let's just call it a mix-up. For Mom's memory, if nothing else. She hated when this family fought in public. Invoking Carol was the closest thing to a low blow I felt that whole evening, and he knew it the instant it left his mouth, because his eyes dropped to the floor before I could even answer that I drove 3 streets over to Ellie's instead of straight home, because a father develops instincts even with his heart somewhere close to breaking. I told her everything, plainly, because she deserved the truth more than she deserved my comfort right then. She was quiet a long time. Then she said something that opened the day up in a new direction. Renee called me 2 weeks ago, she said slowly, hearing her own memory with new eyes as she spoke it. She asked if I'd heard anything about Marcus's business struggling. When I said no, she told me not to worry, that it was probably nothing, and to let Marcus handle his own way. Dad, I think she knew something was already wrong before any of this, before the obituary, before any of it. I asked Ellie if she'd told Marcus that Renee had called her. She hadn't. She'd been sitting on it. She said, not sure what it meant, not wanting to accuse anyone of anything before she understood the shape of it herself. I told her she didn't know anyone's silence about what she knew. Not anymore. And she nodded like she'd been waiting for someone to say exactly that. I didn't sleep much that night, but I spent the hours on something better than anger, a habit from running a hardware store through 3 recessions. When something breaks, you don't yell at the shelf. You write down exactly what fell and in what order: the bank call, the obituary, the photograph and its source, the account attempt at 214, the donation total, screenshotted at every stage by Dottie without either of us realizing how valuable that would turn out to be. Platforms can edit a page or take it down, but a phone doesn't forget what it already captured. In the morning, I called Nathan Cole, an old customer who used to buy fence posts for me every spring and now handles small estate and fraud matters 2 towns over. I told him everything, in order, the way I'd written it. You did the right thing keeping screenshots, he said. Here's what's real and what isn't. Identity misuse for a fundraiser is a genuine problem, and platforms take it seriously once you can prove you're alive and never authorized it, which you clearly can. The attempt at account access is a bank matter first, a police matter second if you choose to file, and it strengthens any civil claim down the line. What it is not, Walter, is a guaranteed case that puts your son in handcuffs by Friday. Real life moves through documentation, not outrage. One more thing, Nathan said, before I could ask my next question. Don't confront anyone until you've got the paperwork in hand. Not just promises from a phone call. People remember conversations the way they need to. Walter, documents don't have that problem. I asked what I should actually do, step by step, since outrage wasn't going to fix a loan, a fundraiser, or family. Get everything in writing first, he said. Bank incident number, obituary platform ticket, fundraiser platform's fraud confirmation. Then decide what you actually want. Restitution, an apology, boundaries, a police report for the record, even without pursuing charges. You can want more than one. Just decide what matters most, because that's what you'll hold on to when they try to talk you out of arrest. I called the fundraiser platform that afternoon and, after 2 transfers, reached a fraud specialist named Alicia, who pulled up the page while I sat on hold staring at Carol's photograph on the mantel, as if she might have an opinion on all this. I can confirm the page is frozen pending review, Alicia said. I want to be honest about how this works. We don't return money to donors automatically in every case. Since the page was fraudulent, we hold the funds during investigation, and donors can request individual refunds. Anything unclaimed within our review window gets redirected to a verified charity, per our terms, not released to any individual, including you or the person who created the page. That single sentence untangled something I hadn't let myself work through. Whatever Marcus imagined this money might eventually put in his pocket had never been his to collect, not cleanly, not once fraud was on record. I drove out to see Sandra that same week, mostly to thank her, but also to look at the account that had started this with my own eyes. She showed me the frozen M. Dansen family updates page in her pending queue, and beneath it, in comments no one had thought to screenshot before it was hidden from public view, a reply from Diane's account, 2 days after the obituary posted. Praying for the whole family. Let me know if the fundraiser needs a push. I can share it further. And beneath that, a reply from the family account itself, thanking her, asking her to share it wherever she could. Marcus hadn't just built a lie and let it drift on its own. He had fed it once it started working. I went back to branch and asked Ms. Patterson what a formal fraud report would actually accomplish beyond paperwork. It creates a permanent record, she said. It protects you if this ever happens again. And practically, Mr. Dansen, if you want your name off that loan guarantee cleanly, a documented identity misuse incident makes that conversation with the lending department a great deal easier. I called Corey back once more before I called my children, mostly to close the loop, and he told me the platform's verification team had approved the takedown requests and would post a correction within the week, once their legal review signed off. For what it's worth, he said, I've handled a lot of these. Most of them are strangers trying to scam a town. This one wasn't. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing and exactly who you were. He didn't know how much that sentence would matter to me later, sitting across the table from my own son. That was the moment the fog thinned enough to see the actual shape of what I needed to do. Not revenge, not silence. The truth, written down, filed. Impossible to talk away over a kitchen table. I called Marcus and Ellie and told them to come to the house Sunday, the day already set for dinner, and told them Renee should come too. Dad, is this really necessary? Marcus said, we already talked about this. We had talked about it. I told him we had not yet told the truth about it. There was a difference, and I intended for everyone in that house to understand it by the time dinner was over. They arrived within 10 minutes of each other, which told me they coordinated beforehand, likely to agree on what to say. The way people rehearse a story they've had practice managing together. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I sat where I always sit, across from where Carol used to sit, and let the quiet stretch a little longer than was comfortable before I spoke. I want to understand 3 things. I said, who created the obituary? Who knew it wasn't true before I found out? And who tried to get into my account? I already have some of the answers. I want the rest said out loud in this room, without anyone leaving out the part that makes them look bad. Marcus went first, the way he always has, since he was a boy explaining a broken window before his sister could offer a different version. I created it. I already told you that. Used the template. Used the photo from Ellie's engagement. Set the goal at $8,000 because that's roughly what covered the missed payment and the late fees before I could refinance. I asked him again about the account, wanting it said plainly, not softened into seeing if the deposit could be rerouted. I try to add myself so I could move part of your deposit into a separate account temporarily. He said, quieter now. I was going to put it back. I repeated and let it sit in the room the way a bad number sits on a ledger until somebody finally admits it isn't going to balance itself. I turned to Renee, who'd been sitting very still, hands folded in a way that looked composed and wasn't. Ellie told me you warned her, 2 weeks before any of this, that something might be coming with Marcus's business. Is that true? She glanced at Marcus, then at me, and something in her gave way, not dramatically, just quietly, like a fence post finally leaning after years of wind. I knew he was behind on the loan, she said. I didn't know about the obituary until the night before it posted. He told me it was the only way to stop the guarantee call before he could refinance. I told him it was a terrible idea. I told him repeatedly. But I didn't tell you, and I didn't tell Ellie the truth when she asked. I thought if it worked fast enough, nobody would need to know how close it got. I was trying to protect my own family. I am your family, I said, without raising my voice, because I promised myself in the car that morning I wouldn't become a man who needs volume to be believed. Ellie had been quiet, jaw tight, and when she finally spoke, her voice shook with something closer to fury than sadness. You let me believe Dad was sick, she said to Marcus. I shared that fundraiser with people from church. I called Aunt Diane crying. I told my own kids their grandfather might be dying because you needed a few weeks. I know how bad it sounds, Marcus said. It doesn't just sound bad, she said. It is bad. I asked Marcus about the reply to Diane, the one urging her to share the fundraiser further. For the first time all evening, he didn't have an answer ready. I wanted it to cover more than the missed payment, he admitted. Once I saw how fast people were giving, I thought, if it goes far enough, maybe it clears the whole loan, not just the late fees. I know how that sounds now. I didn't let myself think about it that way at the time. You let yourself think about it exactly that way, I said. You just didn't let yourself say it out loud to the people who trusted you. Renee spoke up before I could move on, her voice tighter than before. I told him to stop the second money started coming in. I want that on the record, too, since we're apparently keeping one tonight. You told him privately. I said, you didn't tell me, and you didn't tell Ellie in privacy that protect a lie isn't the same thing as loyalty, even if it feels that way from the inside. She didn't argue with that. She just looked down at her hands again, and for a moment nobody at the table said anything at all. I laid the papers on the table then, one at a time, not to humiliate anyone, but because Nathan had told me clarity, not anger, was what kept a room like this from dissolving into noise a guilty man can hide inside. The bank's written confirmation of the access attempt, the obituary platform's ticket number, and Corey's note on the forged authorization. The fundraiser platform's fraud hold notice, Dottie's timestamp screenshots, showing the donation total climb while I sat in my own kitchen very much alive. This is what actually happened, I said, not a mix-up. Somebody built a story, told half of it to my daughter, hid the rest from me, and tried to get into my account before I ever knew to look. And when I started asking questions, I was told not to make a scene, for your mother's memory, no less. Marcus's composure finally cracked, and for the first time that evening, he sounded less like a man managing a crisis, and more like a boy who understood exactly how much he'd broken. What do you want from me, Dad? You want me arrested? You want me to lose everything I built trying to fix one mistake? I want the truth to have cost you something, I said. Right now, the only thing it's cost is my reputation, and that was never yours to spend. I told him what I decided alone, over coffee that morning, in the same chair where this whole thing began with a phone call about my own death, that I was removing myself from the loan guarantee entirely. With Nathan's help, using the documented fraud incident to do it. I was filing a police report for the account attempt and the identity misuse. Not to see anyone prosecuted, but because a written record protects a man in ways an apology never will. I was insisting any unreturned donation money go to an actual charity, not held, not figure out later. And Marcus would no longer have access to any of my financial information, not out of cruelty, but because trust isn't owed, it's kept, and he'd show me exactly what he did with it the moment things got hard. And Renee, I said, I'm not asking you to betray your husband. I understand loyalty. But you let my daughter carry a lie for 2 weeks she didn't deserve to carry, and you let me learn I was supposedly dying from a church prayer chain instead of from you, when you already knew there was nothing wrong with my heart at all. That's yours to sit with, not mine to forgive on your schedule. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Ellie was crying quietly. Marcus stared at the table as if it might rearrange itself into a version of the evening he could live with. So that's it, he finally said. You're just done with me. No, I said. I'm done pretending love means I have to stay quiet about what you did with it. The obituary came down 11 days after it went up. Not because of Marcus's first call, which accomplished nothing, but because Corey's escalation team confirmed the forged authorization and posted a formal correction where the original had been, stating plainly that the listing had been submitted without the consent of the individual named, who is alive. Reading my own correction was a strange kind of relief. Not joy, just the quiet satisfaction of watching a false thing get labeled false, in writing, where anyone could find it. The fundraiser platform refunded 61 of the 91 donors within a month. The remaining balance, a little over $2,000 nobody could be reached about or that donors declined to reclaim, went to the county food pantry. For the platform's policy, and per my insistence, when Marcus quietly asked whether any of it could go toward what he still owed the bank instead at MS. Patterson helped me file the fraud report, and 3 weeks later, with Nathan's paperwork behind it, the bank released me from the loan guarantee. Marcus refinanced on his own, at worse terms than he'd have gotten with my name attached, which felt less like a punishment I'd handed him, and more like the actual cost of the thing he'd tried to avoid paying by pretending I was dead in the first place. I filed a police report the following Tuesday, a short conversation with a young officer who took my statement, logged the bank's documentation, and told me plainly that without evidence of funds actually moved, the district attorney's office was unlikely to pursue charges beyond a formal warning letter to Marcus about identity misuse. That was the outcome Nathan had predicted almost word for word, and I found I wasn't disappointed by it the way I might have expected to be a month earlier. The record existed now. That had always mattered more to me than a courtroom. He called twice a week for the first 2 months. Short calls, careful ones, mostly logistics. Did I need anything from the hardware store he now used instead of mine? Had the correction notice reached everyone it needed to? Slowly the call got longer, and slower still. They stopped sounding like damage control, and started sounding like a son relearning how to talk to his father one sentence at a time. I let him relearn it. I didn't rush it, and I didn't pretend it was finished before it was. Renee and I spoke once, at Ellie's request. Over coffee neither of us finished. Her apology was real, not a performance, though I told her plainly that it didn't erase 2 weeks of my daughter believing her father was dying while Renee knew better. She and Marcus started counseling that fall. Partly for the marriage, partly, she admitted, because she didn't like who she'd become willing to stay quiet for. I don't know yet whether it will hold. I've learned not to predict people's better intentions before they've proven them with time. Ellie forgave her brother faster than I expected, though not fully, and not without conditions of her own. She told him plainly that if he ever asked her to carry a lie for him again, of any size, that would be the end of it between them, no negotiation. He agreed. I hope he means it. Hope and trust, I've learned, are not the same currency, and I no longer spend the second one on the strength of the first alone. Diane called herself, once she learned the truth, mortified, insisting on getting her $300 back even though I told her not to bother over some that small. She sent it anyway, with a note apologizing for grieving me instead of simply calling to check. I kept that note longer than I kept most of the official paperwork, because it was the one apology in the whole ordeal that hadn't been negotiated first. The town moved on faster than I did. A few neighbors brought their casserole dishes back, sheepish, laughing about the mix-up, and I let them laugh, because most of them had only been guilty of grieving a man who wasn't gone, not of building the lie itself. Dottie still checks on me every Sunday, though now out of friendship instead of mourning, and I've come to appreciate the difference more than I expected to. Sandra posted a follow-up on the alumni page a few weeks later, plain and unadorned, correcting the record for anyone who'd missed the platform's official notice. Frank told me people talked about it for a week or two, and then, the way small towns do, simply stopped, folding the whole episode into the general weather of local gossip, until something newer came along to replace it. I minded that less than I thought I would. I hadn't wanted an audience for my vindication. I'd only wanted a lie to stop being true in anyone's mind but the people who told it. I still go to Cobb's Landing every June. I went alone this year, the way I always have, and sat on the same rock I've sat on for 20 years. Thinking about how the one detail meant to make a stranger's obituary feel true was the one detail that told me, without a shadow of doubt, exactly who had written, I think sometimes about Marcus insisting no real harm was done. I believe he meant it when he said it. In his mind, the harm was only ever temporary, a debt quietly settled before anyone noticed the method. He never accounted for what it cost a man to sit in his own kitchen, reading strangers describe him in the past tense. He never accounted for the particular loneliness of being mourned by people who hadn't once, in the years before that obituary, called just to ask how I was actually doing while I was alive to answer. That's the part I've turned over more than the money, more than the account, more than the lie itself. My family found it easier to write a eulogy for me than to have an honest conversation with me. It's a strange thing to survive your own funeral and discover the hardest truth wasn't that someone lied about your death. It's that they'd rehearsed how and been more prepared to grieve me than to actually know me. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, though I did for a while. I say it the way you know to crack in a foundation you intend to keep living in anyway, because it's still your house, and most of what's built on top of it is still worth saving. I've made peace with loving people whose worst moments I've now seen clearly, without pretending those moments didn't happen, and without letting them happen to me twice. Marcus is still my son. Ellie is still my daughter. Renee is still, cautiously, family. But I no longer confuse quiet with dignity, and I no longer let anyone tell me that protecting my own peace of mind is a scene I'm making. Carol used to say the truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time. I didn't understand that until I spent 11 days dead to half my town, and alive enough to watch, carefully and without raising my voice, exactly who told the truth about it, and who simply waited to see if I'd let them get away with the lie. I buried nothing that year, except the version of myself who would have.